The lioness was lying on the ground. She was breathing, but she made no sound. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't dead. She just couldn't give birth. And as time passed, she was losing not only what was inside her, but her own life. Kamau didn't know what to expect when he reached that moment, but what he saw was unlike anything he had ever seen. The earth was cracked. The sun was beating down overhead. But the real heat was in the giant torso writhing on the ground. On one side was the silence of death. On the other, a choice.at the lioness's head. The male lion stood like a wall, staring at Kamau without moving. He did not roar. He was not attacking. But his eyes said clearly, "Don't come any closer. He is mine." But here's the worst part, if Kamau didn't come closer, she would die. And the cub inside her would suffer the same fate as her mother. At that moment, everything stopped. The air stopped, the wind stopped, time froze, and life was compressed into a single sentence: if you get close, what happens? In the wildlife videos we watch on YouTube, lions are always strong. They hunt, they protect, they dominate with a roar. But no one shows you the tears of a lioness unable to give birth. No one tells you that a male lion trying to protect is actually scared. And no one knows the inside of the human being who has to be there at that moment and make a decision, and that is where this story begins. Kamau was a conservation officer in Makoto National Park for many years. He would observe, record the behavior of the animals, and if intervention was necessary, he would be the last to decide. But that morning, a voice over the radio shattered all the rules he knew. Outside Zone 3. She may be in labor. Lioness lying down. No movement. The male is with her. Cannot approach. It was 7:24 in the morning when this message arrived. Zola had not finished his coffee. Kamau hadn't even written in his notebook. But the emotion that gripped them both shattered the silence of the morning. Because this message was not just an information. It was a call. And that call was silent, but it spoke volumes. Zola locked eyes with Kamau. "Birth," she said. Kamau did not nod. But one word from his lips said it all: "It's time." They got into the car. They didn't talk on the way. Because some roads are traveled in silence. Kamau was at the wheel, but his mind was already there. He had witnessed many animal births before. Most of them went smoothly. But some were difficult. The birth of a lion is one of the most vulnerable moments in nature. Because at that moment, there's no roar, no attack. Just contractions. And sometimes, a silent cry for help. All along the road, the trees were still. There was no wind. Zola checked the contraceptive needle in her bag. If it had to be administered, they had to be very careful. Because prenatal intervention could put both the female and the cub at risk. But without intervention, death would be inevitable anyway. In Kamau's head, only one image was spinning: a female lying on the ground. A cub not moving. And a man standing next to them, unable to do anything. This must not happen. Not at any cost, not at any cost. The air was still heavy when they arrived at the scene. The ground was dry but the sky was muffled. The pair of lions were exactly where they had been reported. The lioness was on the ground, motionless but alive. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were closed. Her belly was heavy. There were contractions but no progress. The male lion was standing. Tense. Big. But silent. There was a menace in that silence that would send shivers down one's spine even if one did not approach. Zola whispered. "He won't let us." Kamau's inner voice spoke louder, "But we will not ask permission. We will help." He had to take a step, but each step would both save lives and put his life at risk. This story begins in that moment when life competes with silence, and there are some stories, no matter how much you watch, you can't understand until you're in it. You are now in front of a screen, but Kamau really stepped on the line between life and death that day, and sometimes, not only a lion is born there, but also a human being. Kamau never remembered seeing himself so clearly through the eyes of an animal. He had been fixated on those two lions since that first encounter. Because they weren't just animals. There was something between them. Something that anyone would miss at first glance, but that anyone who knew how to observe would immediately recognize. The synchrony in their posture, the language in their gaze, the respectful yet alert way they approached each other's space, Zola was the first to notice. He had stopped looking through the telescope during his morning routine 3 days earlier. Before opening his notebook, he said, "These two are not alone. They are carrying something. One is physical. The other, something else." Kamau didn't understand what he meant at the time, but he trusted Zola's intuition. He didn't talk nonsense. He just wrote a few words in his notebook: female, the abdomen is becoming apparent. Male, constantly in close pursuit. No contact, eye contact frequent. Kamau had observed many lions before. He was especially trained in prenatal behavior. Females would become solitary close to giving birth. Males are often indifferent, sometimes going to other females. But this pair, they were inseparable. In fact, they were getting closer and closer to each other. Both physically and in another dimension. This bond was too human for the laws of nature. He doesn't just accompany her. He changes as he accompanies her, Zola said. Kamau didn't answer, but his insides stirred. Maybe not everything in nature could be explained by instinct. Maybe some bonds were really formed. Maybe sometimes protection wasn't just protection. As Kamau thought about this, other questions began to swirl in his head. That day, the lioness retreated into the shade. She often lay down. Her belly was bigger. Her breathing was fast. As Kamau watched her through the binoculars, their eyes met for a moment. She lifted her head, shifted slightly. She was tired. But there was something else. A kind of impatience. It was as if she wanted to get it out of her as soon as possible, but her body wouldn't let her yet. Soon labor will begin, Kamau wrote in his notebook. But this sentence was not a record, but a premonition. Because that look, it was like a call. When night came, Kamau couldn't sleep. Neither could Zola. The radio was silent, but something screamed inside. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the radio suddenly crackled. The sound was muffled. But the message was clear: Zone 3. Female lying down. No movement. Male with her. We can't get close. She may be in labor. Kamau jumped up. Zola too. Without a word, they prepared. This was no longer observation, but preparation for intervention. In nature documentaries such scenes are given dramatic music, but in reality the only sound is the beating of her heart. When they set off, the morning had not yet dawned. But the sky was clear. Silent. Dark but restless. There was an uneasiness inside Kamau. Zola had a contraceptive needle in her bag, but to use it, they had to get close to the female first. And they didn't know if the male lion would be there. On the way, Zola asked, "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Kamau shook his head from side to side. Such a quiet vineyard? No. Such a risky situation? No. Both together? First time. When they reached their observation point, they slowly stopped the vehicle. They immediately came into view. There was the lioness. Her body seemed to be glued to the ground. She was breathing, but barely. Her belly was going up and down, but irregularly. There were contractions, but no baby coming out. Her eyes were closed. She was either in a lot of pain or slowly losing consciousness, and the male was standing right next to the female. His fur was not fluffy. His tail was still. But his eyes only looked at Kamau. Not giving a warning. But it was drawing a boundary. "I'm here," he was saying. "If anything happens to him, you die too." Zola whispered, we can't do this alone. Kamau bowed his head slowly. But together it's risky. The two were silent for a while. Kamau thought, you can't stop this moment. It is happening. And you can either intervene or just watch. But to remain a spectator, this time it is not enough. This time, you have to feel it. Kamau slowly got out of the vehicle. With each step there was not even the sound of the earth. The male lion turned his head slightly. His eyes did not change. His gaze was clear. As Kamau took a step, Zola followed. She was holding a birth support needle. Her hands were shaking, but she made no sound. Kamau knelt on the ground. He stopped a few meters from the lioness. The male lion didn't move. He just watched. Kamau closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Then he slowly touched the earth with his hands. He approached the lioness's body. He tried to feel the contractions with his fingertips. The body reaction was weak. Very weak. Her breathing was intermittent. Zola silently extended the needle. Kamau opened his eyes. He nodded with a slight tilt of his head. Zola knelt down. He carefully prepared the needle. The lioness opened her eyes slightly. And looked at Kamau. At that moment the world stopped. There was a person in those eyes. Maybe a mother, maybe a cry for help. But one thing was certain, trust. The injection was administered. The male lion took a step. Kamau did not move. The lion came closer. And stopped. Just stopped. He kept his eyes on Zola. But he didn't attack. He just stood there. Minutes passed. The lioness's body trembled. The convulsions began to increase. Her eyes closed. Kamau couldn't feel his heart. It was as if her chest was empty. Zola clasped his hands together as if in prayer, and then, there was a sound, very faint. So thin. But real. It was the first breath of a lion cub. The lioness moaned. She opened her eyes. She sniffed the cub. And then, she began to lick it. Kamau closed his eyes. A tear fell to the ground. Zola held her breath. Then her eyes filled. Sometimes survival is not a battle. Sometimes it's just a decision. And the moment you make that decision, a life can change. The birth of a lion is nature's most fragile but most powerful moment. And Kamau learned that day that nature doesn't always say thank you, but sometimes, it forgives. At night, Makoto is plunged into total darkness. During the day everything is clear, visible, loud, but at night nature doesn't even whisper. It just waits. It hides. Sneaking. And something happens. And if something happens, it's always at night. Kamau couldn't sleep that night, neither could Zola, because everything seemed fine, but there was something felt. Unidentifiable. It can't be explained. But it can't be suppressed. It's like a disturbance. It doesn't stop. It doesn't sleep. The radio was silent. The patrols had returned. But deep down, Kamau knew. Nothing was over yet. The cub was born. She was alive. The lioness was tired, but breathing. The male lion still stood over them like a bulwark. But that posture, it said something else now. The day before, it had been protective. Now, uneasy. It was 2:10 a.m. He and Zola went out at the same time. They checked the radio. It was quiet. But the sky was no longer clear. There was wind. It was strong. Kamau raised his head. He read the clouds. An old habit. There was a sound in the distance. Like a deep humming. A sound that came with the wind but was not the wind. Zola asked, "Is there a storm coming?" Kamau did not answer. He stared into the darkness. That sound is not the wind. At that moment the radio beeped. Squeaky. An indistinct sound. But the word that came out of it was striking. Zone 3, confusion, lion, movement, out of sight. Kamau gripped the radio. Can you repeat that? Which lion? But there was no answer. Just a hum. A burst of sound. Then silence. He and Zola locked eyes. At that moment, they had the same thought, the puppy. They jumped in the car. They set off at speed. Makoto's dirt roads become something else at night. Every stone, every curve is harder. Every dark shadow deeper. The light only shows a limited area, like a flashlight. But the image that appears before his eyes on the road is bigger than his imagination. Something might have happened to the cub. Wolf packs would occasionally approach the park boundary. Especially in the rainy season, when food was scarce, the risk grew. Kamau knew this. In fact, last year, an elephant calf disappeared in the same way. The herd had separated it from its mother. All that was left were a few tracks in the ground. Zola whispered, "Are we too late?" "Not yet," Kamau said, keeping his eyes on the road. It took them 20 minutes to arrive. The headlights smashed through trees, bushes, stones. And finally, they arrived, but the scene had changed. The lioness was still there. Weak. Immobile, but alive. The male lion was gone, and the cub. Kamau got out of the vehicle. Zola too. They took the lights in their hands. They scanned the ground. Footprints, so many. The tracks of a male lion, other smaller tracks. But at some point, other tracks were mixed in. Kamau bent down. He pressed his hand into the earth. He ran his fingers along the edge of the tracks. "Jackal," he said. "At least 2. Zola held his breath. "No. This can't be." Kamau quickly began to follow the tracks. Zola behind him. Flashlights in their hands, eyes in the dark. Their hearts in their throats. Because this time it wasn't just about saving lives, it was about seeking them. And with every second that passed, the odds grew worse. Halfway down the road they saw the male lion. He was under a tree, his head bowed. He was not moving. Kamau slowed down. Did he do it? Zola was surprised. "What are you saying?" Kamau stopped. Maybe he couldn't protect the cub. Or, she took it herself, hid it. At that moment the male lion raised his head. He looked into the light. His eyes were not bright. They were sad. Kamau recognized that look. It was a look of defeat. A look that said, "I couldn't keep up." Zola started to cry. Kamau slowly approached. But the male lion didn't react. He just stared. Then he put his head down. When they went to him, there was something on the ground, but it wasn't a cub. It was blood, just a few drops, and a small bitten piece of an ear. Zola collapsed. He held his head in his hands. Kamau turned his head. The sky was dark. But that darkness no longer came from outside, but from inside. The cub had been lost, maybe coyotes, maybe something else, but the truth was clear, it was gone. Kamau closed his eyes. He remembered that zebra birth. The same feeling, the same emptiness, the same sense of being late. He looked at Zola. Her eyes were like glass. They were broken. They had tried so hard for everything. But life, sometimes it wouldn't let them. The male lion stood up. He walked away quietly. They didn't follow him. Because they didn't want to interfere with his grief anymore. In the morning, they returned to the station, but they were empty inside. Zola didn't speak. Kamau opened his notebook. And wrote only one sentence: "Some lives cannot be saved." That day, the park management took stock. They documented the loss. Jackals were blamed. Plans were made to reorganize the guard posts. But none of what was written on those papers described what Kamau and Zola felt, because they had lost not just a cub, but a faith. And when night fell, nothing was the same. But the story wouldn't end there, because nature always gives another chance, sometimes, when least expected, when Kamau opened his eyes, it was not morning. But the color of the night had changed. The sky seemed to have faded rather than darkened. There was something in the small hut that used to be an observation station. A movement. A feeling. Zola was quiet, curled up on the sofa, asleep by the bedside of the little lion they had wrapped in a jacket. Kamau went out at dawn, tiptoeing. The ground was cold, the wind soft, but the message was clear: something is coming. They had found the cub last night. But still not everything was certain. Those little breaths, those trembling contractions, it was all an effort to live. But in nature, effort is not enough. To live, one had to be accepted. Kamau looked at the horizon. The only thing breaking the silence was the short song of a distant bird. Years ago, on mornings like this, he used to wonder what he had done wrong. But this time he didn't want to question anything. This time he just wanted to feel. And what he felt was an indescribable anticipation. When he went back inside, Zola was awake. Her eyes were misty. He put his hand on the little lion, listening to its breathing. They locked eyes. They said nothing. Because morning sometimes began with wordless agreements. At that moment, a creaking sound came from the outer door. They both turned at the same time. Kamau reflexively reached for the metal bar by the door. But then he recognized the silhouette, David, from the park management. Kamau's breath caught in his chest. "How did you find us?" David stepped closer. He kept his eyes on the cub. For a few seconds he said nothing. Then he said in a low voice, "Everyone was worried. I followed you. I didn't inform the center. I wanted to see you first." Zola was angry. "What is there to see? We broke the rules, we'll be disciplined." David bowed his head. The little lion stirred slightly in the jacket. He was breathing. Kamau's eyes filled with tears, but he did not cry. David came closer. He knelt down. He held out his hand but did not touch it. "Is he alive?" he asked. Zola whispered. "He's not only alive, he's resisting." Just then a voice came over the radio: "Headquarters, temporary patrol will be sent to Zone 4. Unrecorded movement detected at observation station." Kamau looked at David. "This is going to get bigger and bigger." David nodded. "I know. But I couldn't report it without seeing it." There was a silence. Then David took a small piece of paper out of his pocket. It was folded. It was worn. He handed it to Kamau. "What is this?" said Kamau. David answered, "Your mother's last note to you. I received it. Years ago, you were here. Do you remember?" The birth of the zebra. Kamau froze. He picked it up slowly. He opened it. There was only one sentence: "Everything lost in nature is sometimes reborn in a heart." Kamau closed his eyes. He balled his hands into fists. Something broke inside him. "But this time silently. We must give him a name," Zola said then. "This time he deserves it." Kamau bowed his head. "Moyo," he said. "It means heart." And at that moment, the radio signaled once more: "Coordinate 22.9. Observation station. Response team en route. Pup found. She's alive. Preparing for delivery to mother." David was surprised. "Who sent this?" Kamau picked up the radio. "Me." Zola opened her eyes. "What did you do?" "Kamau, we can't hide it anymore. If he's alive, they need to know where he is." And at that moment, there was no turning back. Soon the team arrived. The park manager, some veterinarians, 2 conservation officers. They entered in silence. When they saw the cub, everyone went silent. No one turned on the camera. No one asked for documents. They just looked. That's when the cub opened his eyes. It looked directly at Kamau. Then Zola, then he turned his head. He took a short breath. And he moved. That movement was like a greeting, and the next morning, the cub was taken to the lioness. At first, the mother stayed away. Then she came closer. She smelled it. She took a step back. The park management was watching. Kamau held his breath, Zola squeezed his hands, the cub made a sound. A short, shaky moan. The mother returned, she sniffed again, then, slowly she lay down next to it. And put her head on the cub. At that moment, everyone there fell silent. Even the wind. And then, the male lion came out. He stood on the edge. He came closer. He looked at the female, then at the cub. He let out a roar. Quiet but deep. Then he turned. He raised his head to the sky. And it was as if he declared that all was not over, but had begun again. From that day on, Moyo grew up. He became the lion that everyone watched, that everyone knew. But the real connection was that every time a patrol car passed, he would turn his head and look. As if he still remembered those days. One day, Kamau wrote this sentence in his notebook: life is not saved. Life is felt. If you have a heart, you feel. And you just listened to this story. Maybe you smiled. Maybe your eyes filled with tears. Maybe you said, "Is this real?" But now I ask you, what would you do? Would you have left the puppy there? Would you follow the rules? Or would you follow your heart? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to us. Don't forget to subscribe. Maybe in the next story, your answer will be the protagonist. Goodbye. And remember, sometimes a single life can change your whole life.